Poor healers. Well, I guess also as a healer player, poor me. The role has been struggling to solidify its identity in a way that satisfies its players since time immemorial, despite its best efforts. Gamers at both ends of the commitment spectrum, dedicated raiders and more casual players alike, seemingly have healing as one of their major points of contention, to the extent that there was even some attempt at a strike for the role a couple of months back. But despite the opinions surrounding the game's 4 green jobs, I still genuinely believe that at its peak, when the perfect conditions are met, it's so enjoyable to pull off effectively and has a level of skill expression that isn't as evident in either DPS or tank. In progression especially, you have by far the most control over the speed at which your party gains ground, able to turn problem scenarios into standard affair with a smart combination of your abilities. That's why I still play it, despite any flaws that may exist. Now the dust has settled on the inaugural raid tier of Dawntrail light heavyweight, and we've been given the opportunity to experience both how this fresh start, quote-unquote, for Final Fantasy XIV plans on handling its combat encounters going forward, and what, based on interviews, may well be the epitome of the current iteration of job design philosophy before some extensive changes roll in with 8.0. I'm curious what some of the best healers in the world feel about their role. I quizzed 3 top players with world prog and speedrunning backgrounds, each possessing bucket loads of both skill and experience within their role, all about how they're feeling. We'll be discussing the past, the present, and the future, as well as whether they feel the role needs fixing at all, and if it does, what they would do to grant it a shot in the arm. Introducing who will be joining me today to discuss all this. Komachi is a healer for well-established world progression group Kindred, but if you're a long-time sub of the channel, you may recognize from my long-form documentary on the Omega Protocol. Experienced in both blind progression and speedrunning optimization, he has a deep understanding of his role, the game, and a portfolio of placements to back up every word. Oryza is a name you'll recognize if you've been raiding for a while. She is a force to be reckoned with as a raid leader and an extremely proficient healer with masterful fundamentals to boot. She recently led the group's Serenity to a world 2nd placement in Arcadian Light Heavyweight and will be looking towards the next challenge. Kionu is one of the longest standing healing staples of the hardcore progression scene that you can possibly find. With numerous world firsts under Radiance's TPS and top placements before that roster as well, you can be confident in his understanding of all past and present iterations of the healers. This video is sponsored by Surfshark. In this day and age, it's important to be vigilant when it comes to your internet security, because if someone breaks in virtually, they can take everything. And for that problem, Surfshark VPN is the solution. Their military-grade encryption ensures that your personal information stays private, whether you're on public Wi-Fi or at home. You can also use Surfshark on unlimited devices with no additional cost. That means your phone, tablet, and laptop are all protected under one account, providing you catch-all protection at the press of a button. But what sold me more than anything was the capability to access region-locked content on services like Netflix freely. A good example is the US Netflix, which has like triple the back catalogue compared to what we in the UK have access to. Surfshark has over 3,200 servers in 100 countries, so it's as simple as selecting your preferred location, getting comfortable, and enjoying. So check out my code in the description for an exclusive deal combining the best price in the market plus 4 extra months free. There's also a 30-day money-back guarantee, so there is no risk of giving it a shot if you're on the fence. It's cheaper than a coffee after all. Thank you so much once again for sponsoring this video and supporting my channel, and now let's get back to the video. Without further ado, let's get into it. None of the 4 jobs within the role changed too extensively as Endwalker faded and made way for Dawntrail, at least in terms of their healing kits, just gaining small additions, whilst Astrologian was recipient to complexity reductions to their card kit and the removal of Astrodyne to improve accessibility to the job, probably the most significant alteration. The first thing I wanted to ask is whether our experts' pre-expansion hopes for the role were met with the adjustments that we ended up receiving.
I didn't really have any hopes for healers going into Dawntrail, and as expected, healers and Dawntrail stayed pretty much the same from Endwalker. and my former co-healer Sherlock actually ended up quitting the game because of the current state of healers. I am somewhat of a new healer, as my first tier playing healer was Eden's Promise, and my first tier progging on healer was Asphodelos, so I can't really speak on the changes to healer from Stormblood to Shadowbringers. In Endwalker though, changing the cast time of the primary damage spell for White Mage Scholar and Sage to 1.5 seconds was a pretty massive change. It took away almost all of the thought required for movement and weaving, which was a major point of skill expression for healers at the time. In addition, the Astral rework in Dawntrail made the job significantly easier. And this highlights what I feel like the main problem with healers currently is.
So pre-expansion, there were two major issues that I had hopes to see fixed in Dawntrail. Astro, via the rework, and healing in general feeling more impactful. So on the first point, Astro, it's felt since Heavensward like it's too much effort for the output that it did, compared to other healers. Like, without going too deep into it, their direct competitor, which is White Mage for, the regen healer slot, is so much easier to play, and due to job balance in general, it could never be that far behind Astro in performance. So for me, Astro always just felt bad to play. Like, it's a ton of extra effort for marginal gain over White Mage. And then frustratingly, it's still the best choice by a decent margin in a lot of cases, so over the years there's been a lot of pressure as a high-end raider to play it, even though I don't really like the kit, because again, I felt like it was just too much work. With the rework, I had hopes that some of its clunkiness would be fixed, and I'm pretty happy with the results. Less buttons and a more rigid rotation made Astro feel a lot better to me, than not constantly like staring at your hotbars to see which kind of card you got, for example. And since then I've got it to max level and I've been playing it, and I've been having a great time.
To be honest, I didn't have any major hopes for the healer role. I feel that the dev team's design direction has been pretty clear since Shadowbringers, and I don't expect that to change. With that in mind, my general expectations were met. The same standard gameplay with the addition of a couple passive upgrades and a new off-GCD healing tool.
It's been hard for ages to put a finger on what healer needs to attract more people to it. Healer is almost always last to fill in party finders. Very often the bonus job for roulettes, and in general I feel like the player base of healers is much smaller. It wasn't always like this. Like back in Realm Reborn, there was a tank shortage. Like we very much had less tanks than any other jobs. That shifted over time, I believe, with the healing burden changing. In my opinion, what healer needs to thrive is it needs more to do, with that more to do being less impactful, if that makes sense. We should have more like healing to do without it being pass-fail on a pull. And as an example, I think Dawntrail's dungeons really succeeded at this. There's a lot more to do in dungeons in general. There's more damage, there's more healing. A lot of it is like slow incremental damage, or it's stuff that surprises you with a big hit, but it's never fatal. Like they give you time to be at full HP, and they give you a big hit, and you have a bit of time to react to that, and then a mechanic. I've seen a lot of dungeons where the healer dies early on, and the rest of the team is still able to manage, but it's stressful. And that's, I feel like, how it should be. It shouldn't be easy without the healer, but the healer also shouldn't be bored where if they die it doesn't matter, right? It should feel stressful when the healer dies, but still winnable. Square Enix has shown over the years they have a desire to fix issues like healing in 14 with encounter design rather than kit design. If that's the path that they've been going and they continue to go, which it seems like, I think that the Savage, this tier, was a good step in the right direction. For the first time in like so many years, I had to rethink the way I heal in Savage at this tier, in a good way. What I discovered was that if I threw my mitigations at sections where if we executed the mechanic correctly, we wouldn't really need extra healing, right? Regens or whatever would cover it. But if you mitigated it more, then people making mistakes wouldn't cause a wipe. So an example is the very first mechanic in M4S. If you mitigate it, like when you threw like deploy at it, then people getting hit by the cross AoE would not result in a wipe. People getting clipped by the lightning would not result in a wipe. And you could keep the pull going. And ultimately, like when you're progging, that's all that matters, is the pull can keep going. And I don't feel like I did much of that before this tier. I feel like a lot of these mechanics, when you mess them up, you would just die. Doesn't matter how much mitt you put on it, they would just either get knocked off the platform, or they would die, and you'd have to peel them off the ground. So I really like this direction. Creative healer play that can prevent wipes, but isn't required to pass the mechanic, is, I feel like, healthy healer dynamics. The worst example I can give is O4S's Grand Cross Omega, where everybody is handling these mechanics that are very position and facing oriented, tilting your camera, moving around the room. At the same time, there's a very strict healing requirement. You know, at some point, there are people that are going to drop to 1 HP, and they need to be topped. At the same time, as a healer, you may be afflicted with a knockback, where the boss, if they hit you with anything, is going to push you to the back of the room. It's too much all at once, right? Everybody else just gets to focus on the mechanics, and the healer is sitting here stressing about the healing while also doing the mechanics. And so I feel like that's bad healer design.
I also mentioned that old healer strike a little earlier. Personally, I think it was all somewhat melodramatic and overblown, but as I've been saying in videos for a very long time now, there are real reasons as to why so many players on both ends of the spectrum are feeling a lack of satisfaction in healing. So I pitched the question as to why our experts think this is the case, and whether they believe there is a clean solution that can satisfy both parties. Can Square Enix win?
To my understanding, healing is just not that enjoyable when you're sitting there spamming your GCD filler move. This could be because you're doing content you've done many times, ranging from expert dungeons, extreme trial mount farming, or even your weekly savage reclears. On the flip side, healing is satisfying when needing to figure out things on the fly. No matter the difficulty of the content, like when trying to recover a pool when you get Zeromas in Trial Roulette, and half the party keeps getting stuck into a black hole. Frankly, I don't know of a good solution to this. Making DPSing as a healer more engaging would work, but it's clear that the dev team does not want to go down that route. Making healing casual content more engaging or difficult wouldn't work very well either, since this will only serve a more hardcore player base, and casual healers will quickly become a huge weakling for Duty Finder, lowering the population of the healing player base even more. I don't know what the right answer is, but it's also the dev team's designers' jobs to figure it out. For now, I personally go with the Yoshi P sanctioned advice of just playing other games outside of prog. And this is my opinion, a Stal opinion. Everybody need to go play Xenoblade Chronicles.
I think in dungeons specifically, the emergence of pre-mades leaving out a healer for the roulettes, top being cleared without a healer, how much attention that got, and in general the low incoming damage in like trials and extremes, over the last few years has caused a lot of frustration. Understandably so. Square Enix can't seem to manage keeping healing requirements high without the added stress on an already stressed job. I already briefly mentioned it, well, maybe not so briefly mentioned it in my last answer, but it's possible to keep healing requirements high without causing extra stress to newer healers. The sort of rapid low-hitting AoEs or bleeds that slowly drain out your HP, or reducing the punishment for death like shortcuts to bosses if you die in dungeons. And they've already, I think, begun succeeding at that. I think that we're headed in that direction, and I'm very happy with it.
The amount of fun you have is almost entirely based on the fight and not the job. I'll explain this more in detail later, but TLDR, for damage, you are spamming the same spell the majority of the time, and healing tools are incredibly powerful and require little to no thought to use. Another example of being fight reliant is this current Savage tier, the light heavyweight tier. 3 and 4 in particular need a relatively large amount of healing, and there's even an uptime strat for the knockback towers in 3 that gives the party 2 stacks of bleed, which does around 60k per tick, and that was pretty fun to figure out. 3 and 4 also have a few spots where using single target heals and mitt on your melees, in an organized setting of course, can allow them to greed, and using your single target tools well in general can save you GCD heals in those fights. The problem is, the context of what you're doing also matters a lot, and whether you're in PF, a static, progging, reclearing, parsing, speed killing, etc., your experience will vary a ton. Healing in a static during reclears can be boring, but healing in a PF, where people don't use their mitts and randomly get hit by mechanics, can be more engaging, or frustrating depending on who you ask. And when you're speed killing and farming limit breaks and doing weird strats, it feels like you're playing a completely different game. Obviously, no matter what job or role you're playing, there will be some differences in how you play in these contexts, but for healers, it feels like completely different universes. I believe this issue arises because healers are too easy and boring to play. The damage rotation, especially after the Astra rework, is basically non-existent, and healing buttons are too powerful and free. My proposed solution to this is to implement an actual damage rotation that requires thought, a healing rotation that requires thought, and most importantly, interaction between these two rotations. I don't want healing to be significantly harder though, because the new player experience for healers is very important, but it should at least be more interesting and engaging to losslessly heal and also reward players for losslessly healing more than it does now. Currently, the majority of healing buttons is just press one button, then get a ton of healing. On Astro, not only do you have a ton of free healing tools, but you also have Neutral Sect. If you use a Neutral Sect Helios Conjunction, which is the AoE GCD regen, you get a 300 potency heal, a 1050 potency regen, a 375 potency shield, the ability to upgrade your horoscope, and on top of all that, access to Sun Sign, all at the low cost of a single GCD, which, over the course of a 6 minutes and 30 seconds long fight, is less than 0.5% of your damage. To put this into perspective, critting a single Malefic in that time frame increases your damage by roughly 0.3%. Of course, cooldowns that do require thought to use exist, but all healing should require more thought and specifically rotational work to make happen. I think keeping GCD heals powerful and keeping a few of the powerful OGCDs could ease the new player experience and allow new healers to keep the party alive, but I think that GCD heals should be more punishing to use, and most lossless healing tools should be weaker and require more than just pressing one button. That way, newer healers won't wipe the party while learning the role, and they'll be more incentivized to learn their kit fully. At the same time, people who have mastered healing won't bore themselves to death with 18 different overpowered healing abilities at their disposal.
Light Heavyweight has been a raid tier with a lot of heated discussion surrounding it. I wanted to know what our experts thought of the tier, both purely in terms of personal enjoyment, as well as critically in comparison to that which came before, and whether they believed it was a strong entry to Final Fantasy XIV's catalogue in terms of healing. I was then curious, so I asked what was their favourite healing challenge in FF14's history, and why.
I really enjoyed healing the Savage tier. I think it was pretty easy to heal. There weren't a whole lot of like critical heal here or we die stuff. There was still a lot of healing to do, but I felt like it was pretty satisfying and mostly just mistake prevention rather than healing up damage, if that makes sense. A lot of proactive healing could save people from the hearts phases, for example, getting hit by extra hearts or taking a 2-stack, anything like that, or the boss gaining extra stacks. You know, a lot of it's just triage healing, and if you died to it, they'd be like, oh, okay, the boss just got too many stacks, it's whatever, you know. Don't blame the healer, do the mechanics better. At the same time, there's an opportunity, if you're a skilled healer, to save those pulls, and it's really satisfying. I don't think there's a lot of opportunities to use healers' utility. So things like Rescue, Asuna, Repose, I know those are kind of a meme, but I like when they try to find creative ways to use the healer kit, and an example of that would be like in Shinryu, the dragon ads that had to be healed. I think there were some interesting options with that, things like Benediction, for example, being able to be saved to instantly heal one of the dragons. Crowd controlling the slime ads in A3S, and healing Harshnapant and DSR are also examples of just creative uses of the healer kit that I think are fun to engage with. And they don't really explore that often enough, I think, in these fights.
I actually really enjoyed the Savage tier. I will admit that from a healing perspective, it wasn't very difficult even compared to other first tiers like Eden's Gate or Asphodelos, I can't pronounce this, I'm sorry. But for me, I think Savage Prog will always be fun regardless of how easy or hard it is to heal. I also liked being able to recover most pulls even if people made mistakes, and recovery is probably my favorite skill to exercise as a healer. If I had to make one criticism, the second phase of M4S was too light on a consistent outgoing damage, and it was just too easily covered by basic regens and YOLO random mitigations.
So this is a bit of a throwback, but I have a video on my channel about this, but A3S was my favorite prog fight to heal. After post-prog, I did like a huge analysis on the healing there. I was really proud of myself. I felt like the fight, it engages the healers a lot. It had a debuff that made it so you didn't really feel incentivized to DPS. The healing was very intense. Mechanics were very precise, like positioning. Crowd control felt really useful. Like CC the hand, CC the slimes. It had everything. It even had us positioning an ad, the fist that traps the healer, which is something healers almost never do. So it was one of the only times post Heavensward launch where I felt really challenged to do a lot of healing, while still like pulling out DPS wherever I could, because it was obviously a huge DPS check.
Probably Living Liquid from T, although I'm biased because that was actually the first tier I healed. But the constant damage of Jackdaws, Protean waves, and splashes, in addition to all the extra tank damage, was very fun to figure out how to heal while progging the mechanics. The tank damage in BJCC was a fun follow-up as well, and the initial hit of J-Kick after the limit cut transition still kinda spooks me to this day.
I then asked if there was a hypothetical situation in which they could make one direct request of the Square Enix job design team for their role of choice. An addition, change, new skill, anything along those lines that they could have immediately implemented. If they had carte blanche on that power, what would it be? What is that one burning hope that they have more than any other?
Some tools could require you to perform certain actions in a certain order, or do a damage combo that has a healing ability at the end. I'm not very creative. Whatever it is though, the emphasis shouldn't be on difficulty, and it should be on decision making, and especially how fun it is to do. Some other cooked interesting ideas that I have is like the ability to have 2 GCDs at the same time. This will probably have to be on a very long cooldown since the secondary GCD will have access to your healing GCDs and maybe certain damaging ones as well. Think of doing a DPS rotation like Samurai, but at the same time you have another GCD that can be used for healing. It's a completely new mechanic and seems like it could be pretty fun to use in busy burst windows or areas of intense healing, since you would be able to cast a GCD heal from your primary GCD and then also another GCD heal from your secondary GCD. It could also be fun to use for spot healing, as you'd be able to put single target heals, for example Benefic 2 on one guy and Benefic 2 on the other guy. Could be pretty interesting. Cooked ideas aside though, I think there needs to be a complete redesign of both the damage side of healers and the healing side of healers, as the current design puts way too much reliance on the encounter and the context, leading to healing being a very frustrating role to play.
I would love it if healer gauges acted more like white mages. I think this has already been said many times before, but the Lily into Misery pipeline is extremely fun to engage with on white mage, and yet none of the other healers have gauges that really turn healing into damage. I think that's a really fun mechanic. I feel like that's how healer was meant to be in 14, and I wish more jobs did that. So all the other 3 healers, I wish their job gauge would somehow interact with converting healing into damage. Give Astro a dash, maybe Scholar too. Astro's the only one left out, man. Just give him the dash, it's fun. I specifically have always wanted a momentum healer. So basically a healer that builds up some kind of ability to heal off of combos. So imagine a healer that there are major healing buttons are all built up to. Like you do a 1, 2, 3 GCD, unlocks a proc of a healing skill that you can use. You do a different 1, 2, 3 GCD, and you get a different healing skill. And then a different 1, 2, 3, and you unlock another one. And maybe the 1, 2, 3s themselves also have small healing components to them. Or they just get OGCDs to fill in the gap, something to that effect. I like momentum-based healers. I always felt like XIV was prime for a healer that did healing from doing damage. We have small hints of that and stuff like Sage's Toxicon or White Mage's Lily's Misery, which is those are both fun mechanics to engage with, so I wish a healer was sort of built around that.
If I could wish for anything, it would be something like giving us a modified, less punishing version of Cleric Sans. But if I had to be realistic about it, then I would say, please give White Mage more mitigation. It is so far behind Astrologian in that regard. Heal checks in FF14 are often just mitigation checks, and the difference between a White Mage and an Astrologian is so apparent when doing a phase like top phase 6 because of how hard wave cannon hits. Giving White Mage an admittedly okay shield as their level 100 capstone, while Astrologian got a whole 15 seconds mitigation, was just a kick in the teeth. Oh, and also make outgoing healing buffs work on off GCDs, or make the tooltips better or something. Potential balancing issues aside, the confusion of healing action versus healing spell, and examples like mantra buffing Tetragrammaton, while temperance does not, is just really bad communication to the player, especially more casual players who are less likely to research the potential differences. I think a healer that primarily heals by placing ground effects could be cool, but that idea is already seen as a one-off skill for most healers, so not really sure how unique it would feel. Additionally, its skills could be very ineffective due to how FF14's encounter design works, unless all the ground effects are huge like Earthly Star and Sacred Soil. But at that point, the act of placing something like a totem on the ground is more for job flavor than it is for actual gameplay mechanics, since the party, they wouldn't actually need to care about being near the totem.
I firstly want to thank all 3 of our top players for providing me their time and thoughts for this video. Their socials are linked in the description, so please do take a moment to check them out if you so wish. Secondly, I want to open up those same questions to the floor as somewhat of a collective. How do you feel about the healer role? Do you agree with the sentiment shared in this video, or do you have a different stance that you'd like to share? Please do once more let me know in the comment section, because I will be watching it because I'm quite emotionally invested in healers myself. Thank you so much for watching, and hope you have a fantastic rest of your day.